Half on one side being the sharps and half on the other. Oh, excuse me. Half on one side being the sharp letters and half on the other side being the letters. 7 letters, 5 sharp letters, 12 possible letters in the chromatic town of half steps. Every note touching each other. Every note touching each other. Whether you're going from sharp to letter, or letter to sharp, when you're crawling in between the yards like this, and all of a sudden you come to those magical B, C, B, C, or E, F, E, F sections of the keyboard where there is no sharp in between. But that's the beauty, is you can see and feel that 2 and 3 sharp side against the all letter side, and that's how you can find the letter side, is by the touch of the 2 and 3s. You can figure out, oh, I am an B, C, B, C because there's 2's right there, or I'm an E, F, E, F because there's 3's right there. Well, this is great. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. All of those letters, when I play all those letters are half steps. 1/2 of a step, not a whole step. It's like I'm just taking baby steps, just taking little steps, because I'm just taking little steps right next to each other. They are half steps. Every chromatic town just has half steps in between yards. There's no wider yard. There's no, well, excuse me, there's no wider yard is not the right thing to say. There's no stepping over a yard in order to get 2 halves equal a whole. If you want a whole step, you have to have something in between. Whether it is a sharp, easy to see that, in between C below D. There's a sharp, that's a whole step. In between D, in between your things, and E, on top of the keys, there's a sharp. Between E, F, E, F, there is no sharp, so there has to be called not a whole, but a half step there. That is a half step. B, C, B, C is a half step. E, F, E, F is a half step. B, C, B, C is a half step. These are half steps. They are letter notes that do not have sharps in between. You don't have a sharp in between your letter, you must be a half step away. Important to remember. B, C, B, C, E, F, E, F. B, C, B, C, E, F, E, F. Those are the 2 places where 2 letters are touching each other and there's no whole step there. Otherwise, everywhere else, other than B, C, or E, F, what? Other than B, C, B, C, E, F, E, F, B, C, B, C, E, F, E, F. All the rest of the letter-to-letter walkings are whole steps. In other words, well, I'm all B, C, B, C. Now I can B, C, A, B, C. Okay, not B, C, A, B. A, B must be a whole. Is a whole because there is a sharp in between. Remember, the whole keyboard is made of half steps, so it's either going to go to a sharp, from a sharp down to a letter, or 2 letters together. Here is me falling by half steps. We're playing 2 notes together. But now, what if they were A to B? I have 1 in between. That's great, right? Well, what if I'm on A sharp? How do I get to the next whole step? It's not. There's no place to go. Oh yes there is. Go ahead and do it. Just leave a letter out completely. A sharp to C is a whole step. It is. So we got A to B is a whole step. A sharp to C is a whole step. B, I can't go to C. That's part of the B. I have to go to C sharp. I have to go to C sharp because I need 1 in between. Right? So I'm going to leave out those places where there is no sharp in between, I need to skip over a letter yard in order to get a whole step, because I have to have a whole step sometimes. Not always a half step, but I have to have a whole step, right? No touching another. When I held those 3 wooden keys in my hand, I was holding 2 half steps because they touch each other. This touch each other this way makes a half step, and this touch each other makes a half step. But together, 2 halves make a whole. So you can actually go from sharp to sharp with one letter in between and get a whole step. You can also go letter to letter with a sharp in between, okay, and get a whole step. Again, it's just touching each other gets a half step. That's a measurement. A half step is a very important thing to know. You might think, well, why is it so important to know? For one thing, it makes a chromatic city, which is the beginning of all letters of all kinds, which is 5 sharps in 7 letters, which makes 12 possible letters. 12 possible letters. It sounds so basic. If I could just learn 12 letters on the keyboard, where are they? What do they do together? How do they sound together? We're talking to this point. What is a half step? A half step is a note touching another. Well, then if you have 2 halves together, like anything, it makes a whole. So here is 2 halves together. It's 3 together, but there's 1 in between. 1 could be a sharp or a sharp letter, right? Another way it would be like this. Ooh. A sharp and a sharp with just a letter in between. That also is a whole step. It's a whole step from this edge to this edge. From the sharp to the sharp is a whole step. See this in between? This is a letter. Okay, so if you're going here, letter to letter with a sharp in between, or sharp to sharp with a letter in between, you're going a whole step. What if you went from a letter, a BC situation, or an EF situation, the places where there's no sharp in between to even make a jump from sharp to sharp or letter to letter. In other words, I will show you here, sharp to sharp or letter to letter. Remember riding down the middle of the street? On one side, which is the lower side, right here, we have the letter side. On the upper side, which you're seeing right here, is the sharp side. Well, we're riding down and we're touching right in the middle of the street, so we can go either way. That's where we are riding on the keyboard, right in the middle. That's something to learn. Instead of having to worry about notes, no! Sorry. Anyway, I'm just crazed about that tonight. I know. Trying to prove a point. All right. So I am going a distance of a half step or whole step in my learning. It's the second distance away. It's a whole step. It's 1 note in between. Going from one side to the other is considered from 1 to 2 with 1 note in between. Okay, this sounds so simple, but why do you have to know this? Because we're going to go further than that. But we have to know what the 2 is, because you have to learn the 2 of every 1. How stupid can that be? I'll tell you why. Because when you really start to look at it the first time you do it, you don't know it. Between E and F sharp is a 2. Between F and G is a 2. Between F sharp and G sharp is a 2. Between G and A is a 2. Between A sharp and G sharp is a 2. Between A and B is a 2, etc., etc., etc. Between B and C is not a 2, because it doesn't have 1 note in between. Ding dong. Because you need to have a note in between to make it a 2. Why? Because a 2 is a whole step. A 2 is a whole step. So if you're moving from 1 to 2, you move a whole step. 1 note in between. Gone. Whole step. Very important to note. A whole step is what you are trying to learn. What it looks like from every note. Up and down. What is a note down from E? Down to D. What is a note down to D? It's down to C. What's a whole step down from C? It is A sharp. What's a whole step down from B? It is A. Point. Know your whole steps. Everywhere direction. Down and up. Well, we were also talking about a whole step. Remember the beginning here, just a couple minutes ago? Whole step. Well, whole step is an interval 2. Ding bong. This is why. It is the most confusing of the intervals because it is not called 1. As you would think in whole equals 1 in math, a whole, like a half plus a half equals 1. You know, draw it on paper. 1/2 plus 1/2 equals 1. But unfortunately in music, which is so confusing to start everything, 1 already exists. Because this is the first letter you're starting on. Wherever you are on the keyboard, 1, G sharp is 1 if that's where you're starting. D sharp is 1 if that's where you're starting. A is 1 if that's where you're starting. G is 1. F and G is that if that is where you're starting. But that is 1. Point being, if you're going an interval away from it, the next interval away from it, which is a whole step, is numbered 2 in music. It's not numbered 1. So many people take that step and go 1. No, wherever you are 1. You are 1. A, D, G, all those letters were just 1s, because that's where I started. What do you mean when I started? Well, in time, in amount of time that the chord lasts, is the same. The next interval is 2. So we got to find all the 2s. Well, if we're on the sharps, there's a lot of 2s that are. A 2 equals a whole step. Very, very, very confusing. Because in music, they're numbered. All these things are great. Questions and answers are easily found if you know how to measure an interval. And I think it was invented here in the guitar. This is what I think happened. Am I in the center? Am I in the center? Wait, wait, am I too loud? No, okay. All right. This is how I think it was invented. The interval was invented on the guitar. How? The guitar is divided into frets. Each fret, sliding higher, moves an interval. How much does it move? It moves a half step. 1/2 of 1. Not a whole step, meaning 1/2 plus 1/2 equals 1. Like they call that a whole. Here's a terminology thing here. All of a sudden, a half step is a half step. 1 fret on a guitar. But what is a whole step? A whole step is a half step plus a half step. That equals a whole step. So a whole step is 2 frets on a guitar. That's what a whole step is. Bling to bling. Bling to bling. 2 whole steps. Now, I do not know how to play guitar at all. That's why this guitar does not have any other side to it except for the neck. But this is say that I'm right here, and the guitar started it all. Now I'm going to switch your brain. Thank you very much for this guitar demo, because we're in studioE, KEYSongs. An interval from E to F is 1/2 step. From E to F is 1/2 step. EF. EF. 1/2 step. From E to F sharp is 1 whole step because I go 2 half steps. I'm going from E to F, that's 1/2 step, and then what is the next possible note touching F? It's F sharp. It's not G.
Because the next possible touching, exactly all the way back here touching, because remember the street is really in the halfway point right here. It's not down here. The street, this is the alley of the street. The street is this way, the width of my hand. And your fingers are riding in the center of the street and looking on each side of the street, whether it's the upper or lower, left or right, whatever, against, but it's recognizing where it's at on the keyboard via the sharp and the relation to the spacing of the threes and the skis. Right? Following? Okay, so E, F is a half step. E to F sharp is a whole step. Why? Because I've taken 2 half steps. I've gone from E to F, and then F to F sharp. It's another half step, because remember the chromatic city, which is every single note, is made up of all 12 possible letters, all the 5 sharps and the 7 letters, and it is the I love the chromatic city. It just makes your mind wander, doesn't it really? And it is a dimension of the half step. But 2 half steps, and you have to find out where your half steps are. Where are all those possible notes that touch each other? You got to see them, because don't forget the sharp side of the street or the letter side of the street. Both sides, whichever touching, whichever angle you're going from on top of the sharps down to the letters, or from down in the letters to up to a sharp, or from a letter down, from a letter over, or from a letter over. This is all these cool feels that you'll get out of the keyboard. Ding. So now here's gong. So this is my point. If you know, then you go 2 half steps, you get a whole step. But in music, it's not called 1. What? I'm not kidding. It's not called 1. It's not called 1. It is not called 1. 9. The reason it isn't called 1 is because it's the second